a warm good evening to the most vibrant crowd gathered here to listen to the three eminent speakers on the topic, travels across cultures. To begin with, I would like to cite the observation by Simon During in his work on culture studies. He says that culture studies, global cultural formations have become increasingly mobile. The ways in which cultural formations has become increasingly mobile, he cites that it crosses the borders, it travels very faster to different nook and corner of the world. So mobility has become the key to culture, global cultural studies. So today, in that context, in Mathrubhumi International Festival of Letters, we will be having a conversation on the topic, travels across cultures. And as P.B. Shelley cites in Defense of Poetry, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. So we have three poets with us to speak about the global cultural formations and how does the nuances and the intricacies of cultural flows across borders. So to begin with, I would like to ask all the three of you to begin this conversation that one thing which shook me, I was interested by the topic because travels across cultures. So there is across cultures. So the travel is something that we cross a border between cultures. When we say that travels across cultures, when we name a session that travels across cultures, we imagine a certain kind of border or boundary between different cultures. So as poets, how do you see this boundaries or borders across different cultures? As the persons, the speakers who have participated in different literary festivals, how do you imagine, how do you conceptualize border or boundaries between different cultures? Ma'am, I think we will begin from Jennifer, ma'am.
Well, thank you. First thing I'd like to take us back a bit. When I was researching my collection Borobudur, I was looking at the Asian continent in the 8th century, 7th and 8th century, and what is extraordinary about that period is the lack of borders, so that people were travelling across vast spaces for trade or other reasons. And so what was really fascinating was that cultural influences were going with the trade at the same time. So in Indonesia, for example, in this period, the 8th century, old Javanese writers were, one of them composed the first Indonesian Ramayana. So I became incredibly fascinated by this idea, especially as we know how many restrictions there can be on travel in the present day. And that seemed something of a kind of ideal. So I suppose that takes us back a long way. But from the personal point of view, with that book, because it had such an Indonesian focus, I was invited to the Ubud Writers' Festival in 2009. And what was extraordinary about that experience was meeting so many Balinese and other Indonesians and other writers who attended the conference. And I think it's a cliche, things happen to those who turn up, but it gave the opportunity to have that book published in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and to travel to festivals in Indonesia like the Makassar Festival, to have a reading in Jakarta with Gunawan Muhammad, who's a very well-known writer in Indonesia. So I think it gives us really so many opportunities to meet other writers and to have these opportunities.
For me, I would like to take recourse to what Benedict Anderson says about the nation state, and how these are just imagined communities, and how these borders are superfluous in terms of culture. Although we think of India and Pakistan as two different nations today, the superfluous nature of the culture that we share is impossible to delineate that way. And coming from my academic perspective as someone who works on Quebec literature, it's very important to realize that immigration and diasporic writing plays a very big role in today's globalized world. And culture is no longer this singular term that you can use as this is my culture versus this is the other person's culture or this is the other's culture. Because culture is more what is creolized, considering the centuries of the slavery that many of our nations have been through. So, for example, the indentured laborers that are taken from the Indian subcontinent into Caribbean islands as plantation workers or as slaves, I can't possibly say that these are not Indian, but I can't say that they are only Indian. I can't possibly say they are only Caribbean. I can't say they are native Caribbean. So there are so many different elements that these cultures bring along, especially when you're talking as poets, we're talking about language as well. So languages that emerge through these interactions between culture create a space for all of us to inhabit, instead of thinking of culture as something that is distinct one from the other, and more as something that we live, something that we practice, as opposed to something that is monolithic, as you said. And if you just think about, let's say, the regions in India itself, you can't possibly say that one state and the bordering state share different cultures, but you can't say they're the same either. So when you think of culture itself, it's constantly moving, it's constantly sharing something with the other and getting something from the other and creating something new. So the idea of culture and borders is a very interesting give and take that happens when these two elements meet. And especially in today's world, there's absolutely no way to tell one from the other. And if we are, and if we are fighting for one culture or one kind of thing, then obviously we're, on the side of some sort of right-wing, politics, some sort of essentialism, which is quite the opposite of what we should be headed towards in a globalized world.
As Rebecca said, we talk about different cultures, and cultural understanding is based on the very fact that different cultures are different. The diversity of cultures matter. In today's world, we hear two terms, whatever is happening all around the globe. The need of the hour is brotherhood and religious harmony. But according to me, the need of the hour is cultural understanding and cultural sharing. Every type of propagandas, misinformations, they have roots in morphing of cultural traditions of a country or community or certain place. And empathy is also connected to understanding. So, and to understand the diverse cultures around places around the globe, one has to be there, experience the local traditions, local history from the mouth or practices of the local people, and then only it's possible. And of course, travel is important that way. A poet's intellectual and factual role in imagination is to create a broader space in thoughts while traveling in this sphere. And I think nothing gives you more freedom, nothing makes your soul more free, nothing makes your thoughts broader, nothing makes your life more meaningful than to cross borders and travel. Nothing gives you more freedom than to break confines of borders and travel to other places. Uh, I would say it is not always crossing boundaries, you know. Crossing boundaries and going to other countries, it's not always possible for everyone. And it is not always traveling. You can go to the local bookstore, cross the boundary of your house. Your mind should be like knowing about something, you want to know about something, you want to travel. In fact, you can travel in your own mind. You look at the sky, think about something, you break a border and travel to other places. So it is not always the country's borders we are talking about or matter, but also the personal borders that has to be overcome, and we shall move forward traveling this way. So my take on this matter is like this.
So, interestingly, as Rebecca ma'am was speaking about Benedict Anderson's imagined communities, I would like to speak about what Arjun Appadurai calls as imagined worlds. Because in this era of globalization, it's not only imagined communities, but every person around this globe is imagining a certain kind of experience, a global cultural experience, which leads to a kind of homogenization of culture across the globe. So, setting or taking Arjun Appadurai's imagined worlds as a starting point, I would like to ask you that how far has globalization has enabled this traveling across cultures? How far globalization has made it easy to travel across cultures? Because we have an Australian poet who writes about Asia. We have a person from Kolkata sitting in Trivandrum speaking about India. We have another person from Hyderabad. So how far did globalization enabled the cross between or the travel between cultures easy, and how far did it contribute to a kind of a parochial thought also because the borders are not only the border is not only to cross, but it is also to divide people. So how far did globalization has contributed to this division and to the integration? How far this as poets, how do you respond to that? Looking forward to hear your poems as well throughout this conversation, ma'am.
Thanks. Yes, I think that Sonnet's point is a very good one there about how it can travel or experience of an aesthetics can have a global aspect, but it can be within the head. And I think that's a really important thing. And from my experience, that certainly travel came first. But as time went on and working and building up a collection of poetry and realising that space, of course, has an aesthetic aspect, so that you build up within your own self an idea of space and of cultures, so that it's not dependent necessarily on moving yourself. But I think it's a good point that you're making, that with Anderson's idea and so on of the imagined community and voice, I don't know that reference, but I think that these concepts are carried within us and we use them, and of course they can develop and change as we travel. So just coming here is such a different experience for me. You know, when I get back home, it'll resonate, and something will happen from it. Something flowers out of that. So I think it's a kind of, there's two aspects to it. It could be the travel, but it's what you make it within your own head.
Talking about Appadurai's imagined worlds, I think the idea of space as we know it today is a colonial construct. If you go back to writers like Jules Verne, who are talking about going around the world in 81 days, there is a certain kind of ability of man to conquer space. And the colonial project of conquering spaces, conquering specific areas of the globe that the European colonizer thought was a culture that was lower or smaller than theirs, tells us that the project of colonialism to divide the map into different regions according to, especially when you think of Africa and how it was divided after independence, it was very arbitrary. It's not based on the tribal legacy of Africa. It's not based on regional or linguistic demarcation like we did in India, but it's just random. Like the colonizer took a little pen and drew lines across the African continent, and now we call it countries. So these kinds of things come from a very capitalist, ownership-based economy and thought. So globalization in that sense is constantly trying to commodify space, to tell us that space has certain kinds of values, and this space is different from another space. And that's how plantations worked, right? That this particular soil is rich and is able to produce certain kinds of crops, as opposed to another one which I'm not going to colonize because it's not going to yield that kind of result for me. So globalization sort of takes that idea from colonialism and uses it to, homogenize culture, to sell it as one single unit, that all of us are consuming American television, so we're sort of one family in that sense. But are we just consuming American culture, or are we also consuming or products of that culture? Are we also a result of that culture? So that's what I would like to think when I'm thinking about globalization. It divides us. It definitely divides us. And it makes us think we're homogenous. But if you go back to the idea of the passport, I mean, we're not equal. I don't get to go to different parts of the world just because I feel like it. I have to go through thousands of steps before I get there. Whereas someone with a different skin tone, or someone coming from a different racial background or from a different geographical location gets different exceptions as opposed to me. So what makes this person, this X, Y, or Z, more trustworthy? And why do I have to take, let's say, vaccinations before going to certain countries, whereas some people don't need to? I mean, when I'm traveling to, let's call the global north, I don't need to be vaccinated to go to the global north. But if I were to travel to the global south, I'm required to be vaccinated against, let's put it in quotes, against tropical diseases. So there are a lot of things that globalization does. It makes us think we're homogenous, but are we really?
Well, if I have to tell as a poet, poets get very less chance to travel abroad, because the number one is the economic factor. It's huge nowadays. Even after the Ukraine war, the prices have increased and the sponsors have lessened after the COVID also. So either the organizers have to be very strong, or you are not getting any sponsor in the country to visit this globalized world. And you have to be mentally globalized. As Rebecca was saying, we need vaccination. We need vaccinations for our mind. And we have to change our thought procedure. And about traveling to other places, how it has happened, it is it's not the fact that it's happening now. From the time of the Sicilian school of poetry to modern era to postmodern era, poets have crossed boundaries and they have shared their words, and these words have given rise to national, international discourses, which in turn has shaped the cultural history of a country. And it's happening, still it's happening. As we are traveling, many poets are traveling to other parts and sharing their thoughts. It's all about sharing, getting translated. And I would say some people, or I was reading somewhere in a very good travelogue, that it was written, it is very important to travel in a certain way, in a proper way. Now, if I have to think how to travel and how to not, then I would contradict with one of my favorite poets, Robert Frost, whose lines are, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Even Tagore said that when old tracks are lost, new country is revealed with its wonders. So traveling into the unknown, people have to be ready for it. Who knows, you find some inspiration there. Even if you do not find any inspiration, you can write something upon not finding any inspiration. Still, if you cannot find any inspiration, you can just go to a bar, drink something, and look around and invoke Robert Louis Stevenson, who said, our business is in this world is not to succeed, but to fail continuously in with good spirits. So if we keep these all in mind while traveling, go to the cities, and the globalized world would show you only particular, you go to Google, search about a place, they would show you certain monuments, certain things, and 99% of the people are going there. For me, there are parts of the city which you want to see. That's available everywhere. And there are parts of the city which the city wants to show you. For that, you have to travel the alleys, unknown streets, and you can know the culture better that way.
Yeah, poets travel across borders, not only literally but also metaphorically. So we have a poet with us who has traveled to nearly 20 countries as part of literary festivals and recited poems there. So today we are here at the Mathrubhumi International Festival of Letters. So here we can say that this reflects the culture of Kerala in a very different way, because there is a kind of experience that everyone out of Kerala comes here and gets. It's like this is a cosmopolitan space, if I can call it so, a kind of vernacular cosmopolitanism, because Mathrubhumi, a leading media in Kerala, is hosting different cultures, representatives of different cultures here, and engaging in conversations, discussions, etc. So, all the three of you, how do you see literary festivals as an expression of different cultures, and your experiences in visiting different cultures, traveling to different cultures across the globe?
Well, it's always a fascinating experience, not just to travel, but getting invited to different festivals also. That matters a lot. And when you travel to certain places, as I already told, you get to know about the local tradition, the dance forms, poetry, music, arts, painting. Everything is different from one place to another. In Bengal, it's true for every state in India, but in Bengal, if you move from one district to another district, the way of talking Bengali differs. So, it's so diverse, and to understand these diversity, to enjoy this diversity, lit fests are playing a mammoth role at present. They are not only festivals like Mathrubhumi, they are bringing authors from various corners of India and abroad, but there are festivals abroad who are bringing Indian authors also to those countries. And the best thing is, what's happening is translations. At present, there's a boost in the I should say it as the translation era also, because a lot of translation of books are taking place in different languages, and unless you visit a place, recently Elmar Kuiper, a poet from Netherlands, visited India. I was in touch with him for almost 5 years. He came to India, and now he thinks that he should translate Indian poets. So he got to understand the tradition better after coming here. He was meeting me, but unless that person comes to the place, it is very difficult. And that avenue is being provided by Lit Fests. So I think, yes, it's important, and I hope it goes on.
Yeah, just to come back to the topic of who can travel, which relates to this idea, I was thinking of the Iranian poet Behrouz Bokhari, who was trying to become an asylum seeker and was trying to get into Australia. And the way he arrived in Australia was through a leaky boat, and he ended up in the sea in a terrifying experience, and then arriving to be incarcerated for 10 years. And his first appearance in Australia was at the Melbourne Writers' Festival via video. And it was that experience, in a way, the kind of effect that his experience had, his words, that he did finally get released. So that was a kind of extraordinary example. And on the political front, I went to the Irrawaddy Writers' Festival in Myanmar in 2014. And at that time it appeared that there was going to be a new democratic government, and Aung San Suu Kyi was the patron, and she was there at the festival. And that was such an extraordinary experience because the whole city of Mandalay, where it was held, had this extraordinary feeling of passion and excitement for change. And so it's a tragic situation, having gone through that festival and experienced that euphoria, to see where it is today.
I don't think I have much to say about literary festivals, but I think they have a big role to play in a sort of canonization of writers, of the writers you see are the writers you read. So if you're invited to a literary festival, it is a moment to cherish in terms of for the writer itself, where they get the opportunity to meet other people, to meet a new culture, to interact with different writers, because a writer's job is very lonely. But it can also be a very exclusionist sort of endeavor, because all these setups have some link to power and how power structures our vision of the world. And so I wouldn't bet all my horses on literary festivals to, change the way we look at literature or the world or culture. Yeah.
Ma'am, actually, I think your suggestion, the observation that you have made links something to the neoliberal political economy that we live in, and the ways in which literature and culture are being commodified. It's something to be sold. And one more thing to add on to that, who can travel across cultures? Who is able to travel across cultures? Only a person with an economic privilege can travel across cultures, across borders of the nation. So, in that sense, where do we place this exclusionary logic of culture that we see today? The exclusionary logic of neoliberal political economy. How will you respond to that? All the three of you.
So I would be very wary of this kind of setup, simply because it is in its nature exclusionary, like you have said. It does not seem exclusionary to someone who's looking at it from the outside. It seems like, oh, there are a lot of people who are meeting together. There are, let's say, how many people are here at Mathrubhumi? 300? 300. So there are 300 different writers and poets meeting, but there are 1,000 others who are excluded, maybe because of political positioning, because of economic backgrounds, because of the kind of writing that they're engaging in. So in the kind of world we're living in, I think speaking truth to power through your writing alone is going to take you places. You've got to be realistic about the neoliberal setup that we're in, that it does not allow these opportunities to everyone. Your caste, your class, your all other privileges, let's say, as a woman, I'm sure I get lesser opportunities as opposed to men, simply because I know the kind of restrictions in terms of travel that are imposed on young women. So when you think about it, it seems innocuous. It seems like everyone's getting the opportunity to do certain kinds of things, but are they really getting the chance?
As I said before, that it's not about always traveling to other places or crossing borders. You can just cross the boundary of your house, go to the local bookstore. You know, reading different books is also like somebody has traveled, but you can grasp or experience that travel by reading 10 different books. And you can go to the countryside even, and you can go to a long open road. There are plenty of venues in India. Even in every places has some beautiful places to visit. And it is not always like spending money, owns money and going somewhere, unless, like it's a fact, one should be very particular about it, that unless the travels are properly sponsored, we are not going to it. If we start doing it, then this would become a system, some way or the other. So, traveling inside mind, I already said about that. And I think that travel to certain places, like even in a locality, with a mind to just see the world more and more, even the trees or birds or the sky, and just write something, because information is now available in front of your television, in newspapers, in some other way you would get the information. You can address those thoughts in your writing, and I agree with you that writing matters first, and then if you are invited, you are lucky.
Yes, I'd like to add, when you think of Emily Dickinson, she didn't go anywhere, but her poetry lives on. And actually, I know quite a few poets back in Melbourne who don't travel at all, or writers. So they're not interested in it, they don't like it for various reasons. And I don't understand that myself, but it's quite true. It doesn't stop them from venturing into the imaginative world as they wish to do. And at the same time, I agree with the commodification that you're talking about. There's always this, you're an economic unit who's supposed to have so many dollars or whatever to do these things. But I think it's not necessarily a handicap. You can write beautiful work without going anywhere.
Ma'am, also, how do you see the convergence of different aesthetics? From you're a person, a poet from Australia. Australia, you have a kind of aesthetic tradition. And when you travel across cultures, how do you see the different traditions, different aesthetic ideologies, if I can call that, across different cultures as a poet?
Well, I love it because I hear different kinds of form, different kinds of topics, a much broader range of topics. Often, I shouldn't say anything negative about Australian writing, but generally I love to go and hear different kinds of writing. Today I read with two poets at lunchtime. Their work was totally different to mine, using different forms, different ideas. It was a really good session for that reason.
And ma'am, I think your doctoral research was on Quebec, as you have mentioned earlier. So Quebec is an interesting space to speak about when we speak about the travels across cultures, because Quebec is a region in North America, in Canada to be specific, which was colonized by the French colonial forces at the same time when the rest of Canada was colonized by the Britishers. So Quebec occupies a different space in culture of Canada. There was strong cultural tension between Quebec and other provinces. There was different sort of cultural traffic between Quebec. So, as a researcher, as an academic, what do you want to speak about Quebec and the kind of the travels across cultures within Canada? As we have listened about Australia, now we'll listen about Canada.
Quebec is a very interesting space because the French colonized it for Napoleon was there until the 1700s, and he suddenly lost interest in Quebec, so he handed it over to the English. And so the Quebecois people who were speakers of French were suddenly forced to speak English and engage with English culture, so to speak. And so when you think about it, there is a constant tug of war between this need for global acceptance, which is through the English language, but also to remain truthful to their origins, which is the French language. And this is all this while we're not talking about the Native Americans in this space who have languages of their own, who have culture that is completely different from the Quebecois tradition. And when we talk about Quebec literature today, we also think of it as a migrant literature, because this is a space that invites a lot of French-speaking people from across the globe into this provincial space, which is very French, which is trying very hard to keep the French language alive, apart from France. So you have people from different countries like Africa, you have Indians across the globe traveling to Quebec because they're like Indians from Pondicherry or Indians from Mahe who are traveling to Quebec because they're keeping their French traditions alive through living in this space that is constantly using French as the language of communication, or the language of government, the language of politics. So this country is looking to, or this space is looking to break away. There are factionist parties that are trying to break away Quebec from the mainland Canada, and then there are others who want to allow for this multiculturalism and this growth within the larger picture of Canada. So it's a very interesting space when it comes to literature, because there are English writers, there are native writers who are writing in this language called Innu Aimun, and then there are also writers who are writing in French, but that French is not the Quebecois French, or it's not the traditional French of the standard French of the hexagon. They're writing in a French that is their own. So there is a creolized language that's developing in Quebec, which is a specific kind of response to, which has very strong, which responds very negatively to the use of English words in French. Whereas Parisian French, so to speak, has a lot of English words strewn around it. But the Quebec, like for example, the word weekend is retained in French, in the Parisian French as weekend. Whereas in Quebecois French, you will never say weekend. It's almost looked down upon when you use a word like weekend. It's Americanization of French. Whereas here it would be fin semaine, which is end of the week. So it's very interesting how language and politics like meet and talk to each other in these, third spaces that are created because of colonization.
So coming to Sonnet, sir, you are from Bengal. So actually Kerala and Bengal share a very interesting history of cultural exchanges in terms of politics, football, literature and movies. So you directs the chair poetry evenings at the Kolkata Literary Festival. So do you have anything to speak about the cultural exchanges between Kerala and Bengal, two different states in this country? It's very distant from Kerala, but still there is a kind of bondage between, there is a kind of cordial relation between Kerala and Bengal in many terms, in different cultural dimensions. So what do you want to speak about that?
People from both states, I think, love fish. And apart from that, coming to my festival, Chair Poetry Evenings, it started in 2018. And we invite only 16 poets in our festival. That's it. And 16 poets is like among those 16 poets, 9 are from 9 countries reciting in their languages. So we translate their pieces into Bengali and English. If many of them have already English translations, but many we work with to translate it further into Bengali. And then from India, of course, we had poets from Kerala, and we will have more poets from Kerala, I'm sure. And they were also translated into Bengali and English. And I think translations are very necessary to understand the core of the particular poem in your own language. So, and we are also starting Chair Poet in Residence program. We did already with one Estonian poet, Margus Latik, and one Italian poet, Franca Mancinelli, in the year 2019. But then the residency program stopped due to COVID. We are restarting it, and already 2 to 3 poets have been finalized. Most of them would be working on their regional books here, and along with them, our translators would be assisting them to get translated it into Bengali and further into English. So these are all in the pipeline, but it's happening fast. Maybe in 2-3 months, we'll be able to declare it.
So since we have 2 women poets with us today, as a feminist academic and poet, ma'am, I would like to speak about the gendered aspect of travel, which we were discussing a few moments ago. So travel as a process, it's a performative aspect. Travel as a performative aspect because it ensures a social and spatial mobility, which was denied for the women for years back. Even today we have such stories coming from. So social and spatial mobility was denied to women. So travel then became a kind of performative act of breaking all these restrictions and chains which were subjected to them. So how do you see this kind of travel narratives, travel vlogging, etc., done by women, has which is being brought into academic attention in recent times because for the fact that it destabilizes the gender hierarchies that exist in our society. So how do you see that when we travel across cultures, we destabilize certain hierarchies, not only cultural, not only regarding class, but also of gender? How do you respond to that, both of you?
So we started off this conversation where Sonnet said it's just a matter of stepping out of our own homes. It's a matter of taking to the door and going to the nearest, let's say, library, or to the nearest park, or to the nearest bar. And it's also, this kind of ignores the fact that women stepping out of their home means something different or implies something different as opposed to men stepping out. And I have a poem to sort of give you a hint as to why I would be saying this. It's called An Evening Bus. No, the men who held the handlebar with one hand didn't grab my calipigeon behind, stuffed in a figure-hugging pair of blue jeans your mother warned me against wearing. No. They did not grope my double D-cup breasts in their sweaty after-work palms, slicing their hands into my fleshy softness to hustle a taste. No. They did not hungrily graze their bodies against my size 12 figure to feel a rush of blood in their sleazy leather-buckled work pants. What they did, instead, was stand piously away from me, waiting, lurking in cardinal longing for the chart-busting music to change, for the brake pedals to be punctuated with just the right period, for Newton's inertia to take charge, for Earth's balance to stir into the algebraic RHS, a syntactic shift, where the I in my consent became theirs to give, where they became the subject to my verb's accord, so that jiggling their gastric bellies into my steophagic ass was acceptable, running their obese eyes down my t-shirt crammed with 2 bouncing breasts was consequence, jerking in to accidentally stroke the small of my concave back was reflex. All divine design to violate my body, where assent takes the shape of a guillotined woman, and my muffled voice, caught in the crosshairs, always religiously imploring, intent or accident, intent or accident. So, just traveling on a bus on a regular day, women face all kinds of views, all kinds of touch, all kinds of unnecessary comments. So you don't have to go very far in terms of travel for gender to become clear, that gender plays a role in our ability to move across cultures. And we're not even talking about moving very far from our own culture. Within the confines of our culture, just traveling on a bus in the evening will give you a glimpse into all the privilege men have as to why it's easier for them to travel. Because I just don't want to be groped or touched or looked at in a certain way. I may restrict myself from doing these things. But in my restriction, is there resistance? Like, for example, if I decide I'm going to take this bus, even though all this is happening to me, I'm going to talk back to this kind of patriarchal vision of me, then there is also a space for resistance within this poetry. So travel can, maybe I'm making space for a second woman. If I scolded or screamed at a man who seemed to be leching or doing something that's making me uncomfortable, maybe the second time when he does it, he's going to think again. So this can also be a space of resistance where I can create space for other women. And coming back to the question of lit festivals, I think women in power should be able to provide space and make space and hold space for other women and younger women who don't have this space or this opportunity. And, provide this ability for people to cross these borders in order to make themselves heard and make themselves known, and to create a space where these dialogues can take place.
Yes, I think if we come back to aesthetics, where I feel a bit more comfortable in discussion, I think that gender can have an effect on what kind of writing you're able to do. Because when I started writing, there was an enormous amount of policing when it came to women writing. And you'd hear, women shouldn't really, it's not really for them kind of thing, was still in the air. So there's always these kind of ideas of limitation and constriction, which I think can have an aesthetic kind of component. And I think I've always rebelled against that and travelled a lot as a young person and did some really crazy things, I must say. When I look back on it, I think, I'm glad I'm still here. But I think it's something we just have to work against. And in creating your own vision, your own aesthetic, you're doing that too. And all these things come into play, I think, especially anything that constricts you, that confines you within a space, can have a negative aspect, or, if you're Emily Dickinson, it can have a very positive one.
Similarly, Sonnet sir, actually you were speaking about the ways in which travel is not only about going to some place or moving to some place. Yeah, really, even translation. Literary translation is kind of a travel from one culture to another. So how far do you think that the function played by translation in making such travels happen across cultures, across borders? So it integrates two different cultures. When a literary work of literature is being translated into another language, it makes a kind of a certain kind of travel possible across two different cultures. So how do you think that, what is the function of literary translation in that sense?
For cultural harmony to flourish, cultural understanding is very much necessary. And you cannot understand anything unless it is translated into your mother tongue. So I write in English, but I know how important Bengali is to me, because I have been speaking in it, I have been reading books in it. My day-to-day life depends on that language. Such is the importance of translations, If you want to get the reality that's being depicted, because it's not always possible to understand the lifestyle of somebody living in Europe or USA. It's much different for a person to understand that lifestyle living in Bengal or Assam. But at least if one wishes to understand it through literature, then translations play a mammoth role in it. And each book, each good book deserves to be translated, because when a book comes out, it is out in the market, it is for the readers. And readers a book written in one place, in one corner of the world, might have relevance in another corner of the world if translated in that language. And I just want to add one thing, just came in my mind when she said about crazy things while travel, and I was talking, I was also thinking that what did I do in my travels? So travel, it always stirs up your free soul and ignites the rebel inside you. So much so that I stole a boat in Struga. It ignited me so much. I wanted to reach Albania before dawn through the boat. We three of us were there in Struga Poetry Festival. But unfortunately, we were arrested and brought to the shore and later released. So I just wanted to share it with you.
Ma'am, similarly to Jennifer ma'am, when you speak about Indonesia or Asian culture in a country like Australia, so you are doing a certain kind of act where a culture of another region is being brought into a particularly an entirely different context. So how do you think that, what does, it plays a certain important role in the social and cultural formation of that country. So you are in a way universalizing literature, universalizing culture. So how do you respond to that? The way in which you speak about Indonesia and Asian culture in Australia. What is the importance of that according to you? What according to you is the significance of speaking about different cultures in your country?
Well, Australia is a country which has a lot of difficulty in realising where it is in the world. And it's still not really coming to terms that it's within Asia or close to Asia. And because of our colonial history, there's this hangover from that we're somehow part of the West. And of course, it's true to a degree. But it always struck me, we come back to, why we write and why you write what you do, that it is this spatial aspect, I think. We're here, we're in this geography, we're near this history, and it's virtually silent. And it's the same with our Indigenous history also. It's only now that people are starting to respect our Indigenous writers and celebrate them, and other aspects of Indigenous culture. So I think it's part of that, in a way, that looking to a wider world and to a better world, really.
So with one last final question, we will open the session for the audience questions. So the thing is that from the beginning of this conversation, we were speaking about the porosities in borders, boundaries, etc. So we were kind of dealing with something which we can call a kind of a post-nationalism, and where every borders and boundaries will disappear. So my question is that, as poets, do you believe in this what if I can call a romantic dream, where the borders, boundaries across the world will disappear and the world will unite for a single, if I can quote the Indian way of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam or something like that, if whether there will be such a unified, integrated world in the future where the boundaries and borders between human beings, between countries, between regions, between territories will disappear. It's a utopian dream, it's a romantic dream. As poets, do you believe in that or not?
I think politically it is very difficult to happen, and it's not happening. And also, you can erase the borders in your mind. Don't look at the passport so many times while you travel. But the diversity of cultures are important, of course. Like, it's not like we are united and we have just one culture to share. This diversity makes the world very beautiful, very pleasant, and it should remain like that. But of course, the problems created by the borders should dissolve. They shouldn't remain. Borders do not create problems, but the problems created by these borders, they are the root cause of the difficulties we face.
Just wanted to add to what Sonnet's saying. we kind of skipped a very important part about traveling, especially with our virtual ability to travel. So technology has made it possible for everyone to travel across cultures. It sort of democratized the idea of travel. Although you can't physically be in a different country with different borders and passports and requirements of visas, but you can listen to so many people across the globe just because of the kind of technological era we're in. I turn on YouTube and I'm listening to Zizek, and I'm listening to people who I could possibly never meet in person or meet at a literary festival. So this opens up the possibility of democratizing the idea of travel, even though we've been talking about two kinds of travel. That's the physical travel and the imaginative travel, where you're crossing a boundary through your writing or through your reading. And here is another kind of travel, which is a technological traveling, an ability to move into another's culture through the virtual world. And I think with that said, I think it's a positive that we can take away from the idea of traveling to a different culture.
Yes, I think we need to go with the positives and look to the good people and the good creative work that goes on. I think there's always going to be some kind of fight and conflict, but we can do our best to work against that, I think.